The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern.
So last night on Fox News, Tucker Carlson tried to talk about the George Floyd Derrick Chauvin case, and in the process literally snapped and went insane when a police officer wouldn't agree with him.
Are going through the windows of Macy's and the cops are just standing there. Do they resign?
No.
Because obviously their honor is being violated, but they're not doing anything about it. When do they start doing something about it and protecting everyone else, not just George Floyd?
No. What I want people to protect. I want the police to protect people. But specifically what we're dealing with a person in custody who was handcuffed and he was subdued.
Right.
At that point, we have to take a different tact. And one of the things I just want to suggest,
Well,
Tucker,
I'm
there's
totally
a
willing
thing.
to believe that. Yep.
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Justice came out with a position paper on positional asphyxia and sudden death. It was published in 1995 and again in 1998. I think every law enforcement officer should read that. It should be read at roll calls. Because what it does, it talks about the physiology of a struggle. Now, like I said, Mr. Floyd was brought under control. What should have happened at that point is EMS should have been summoned and he should have been placed in an ambulance. And a supervisor should have been called to the scene. I just think that it was excessive and it shouldn't happen. And what I'd like to say,
the guy who did it looks like he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I'm kind of more worried about the rest of the country, which, thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern. But I appreciate you coming on. Ed Gavin, thank you. Nope, done. Thank you. Heather McDonald is the author of The War on Cops. She joins us with reaction.
And so what you saw there was the back half of an interview between Tucker Carlson and Ed Gavin, who's a retired police officer. And basically, Tucker Carlson tried to have this guy on, I guess he didn't do his research, to basically agree with him and say, look, after this verdict, after all the disrespect being shown to the men in blue, no one's going to want to be a police officer in America anymore. No one's going to want to be a law enforcement officer because there's no respect, there's no protection, there's no dignity for them. And the cop disagrees. And he says, look, lots of people are still going to want to be police officers. And I'm concerned about officer safety, but this was not a case to be concerned in because, as he says, George Floyd was subdued. Like, he was subdued. He was, he was in cuffs and all these sorts of things. He was already taken care of. There was no need for Chauvin to do what Chauvin did. And what he's basically saying is, look, there are protocols here. There are protocols. There's medical science. All of these things have been studied. And you can see how infuriated Tucker Carlson got there. You could see how infuriated he was that he had a guest on that actually challenged him. And he does that sort of maniacal laugh. Here's a supercut of it happening 5 or 6 times here. Just absolutely losing it. And then at the end there, he makes it clear that he's not cutting the interview because they have to go to commercial or anything like that. He's not cutting the interview because breaking news is happening. He's like, fine, thanks, done. We're done here. How dare this police officer explain with medical science and with officer science how George Floyd was mistreated. He was supposed to be on there as a talking head to promote right-wing conspiracy theories about how this is bad for the police somehow. Like, it's absolutely crazy. And it goes to show how Tucker Carlson's show is among the most propagandistic on mainstream media. Because let's be clear, Tucker didn't do that to Candace Owens. Tucker didn't do that to other guests that agree with him. The second you challenge Tucker, he cuts you off like that because you are not there to be an interview guest. You are there to be a sounding board and a legitimizer for Tucker Carlson's far-right ideas. Don't lose this thread because Tucker Carlson remains the most dangerous man in America. And if you go on his show, and that applies to quote-unquote left-wingers too, and he doesn't cut you off, it means you're a useful idiot to him.
Don't let them fool you with all that babbling. Babbling is a deflection. All that babbling is a deflection. They depend on white supremacy. They want the system of white supremacy to be maintained. When you see brothers out here in the streets putting in work, people are not letting up on this Breonna Taylor thing. People are calling for the punishment of the race soldiers who did it. That's a blow to the white supremacists. They don't want us talking like that. We're very focused, guys. We're very focused on punishing these white supremacists. And if they understand if one white supremacist get punished, that means that's going to open the door for more of them to get punished. So he, as a white supremacist, he don't want that. He understands his place in the system of white supremacy.
Am I only a God nearby, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Who can hide in secret places so that I cannot see them, declares the Lord? Do not I fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Oh, the drama. But at least the Chauvin trial is over. Officer Derrick Chauvin was convicted yesterday on all counts. The trial went on for more than a month, and at times the testimony was complex and it was technical. But at the center of the case, there was always really just one piece of relevant evidence, and it was the videotape of George Floyd's death in the street in Minneapolis in May. If you haven't seen the tape recently, it remains every bit as shocking as the day it was shot. You watch it and you can see that George Floyd knows on some level that he's going to die. And in the end, of course, he does die. It's crushing that way. Millions of Americans reacted in that way. They saw it. They were horrified. And many decided as they watched it that Officer Chauvin must have committed an act of criminal brutality. So really, it's not surprising that the jury yesterday concluded the same thing. The images in that tape seem to tell the whole story. And in fact, honestly, it is possible that even if no one outside the courtroom in Minneapolis had ever seen that tape, just the jury, it's possible Derrick Chauvin still would have been convicted. The tape is that powerful. That's totally possible. Unfortunately, we don't know that. We can only speculate about it because that's not at all what actually happened. The George Floyd video went around the world. It became the centerpiece of a new political movement. Political actors harnessed the emotion over that video and over Floyd's death to control the country and change it forever. And then, and this is the key and the thing that we should think a lot about, in the last month, some of these same people went further than that. They worked to change the outcome of Derrick Chauvin's trial. And that is the one thing that we can never allow, no matter how we feel about a specific case. Civilized countries have impartial systems of justice. That's the hallmark of a civilized country. It's what separates the country you want to live in from a place you don't even want to visit. Civilized countries demand, above all, that every citizen is held to precisely the same standard under the law as every other citizen is. And that applies no matter how popular or unpopular a particular defendant might be. It applies no matter the alleged crime. Countries like this, civilized countries, do not tolerate jury intimidation. You see it, you stop it. They don't allow the threat of violence to influence the outcome of a trial, ever, under any circumstances. That would be the opposite of justice. It would be mob rule. And America used to strive hard to be like that. And yet just yesterday, we saw the President of the United States throw his backing behind Derrick Chauvin's prosecution. And he did that even as the jury in Minneapolis was still deliberating the case. We saw one of the most powerful members of the United States Congress tell a group of angry people they should act out in violence if the jury dared to acquit. We watched the city of Minneapolis concede responsibility for the death of George Floyd right in the middle of the trial, before Derrick Chauvin's lawyer could even sum up his case. And then, least noted but most ominously of all, we saw thugs threaten a defense witness with death. They smeared pig blood on the door of what they thought was his house and then get away with it. No one in authority seemed especially interested in catching them. These were terrifying acts, and it doesn't matter whether you think that Derrick Chauvin was guilty and deserves what he got. It doesn't matter who you voted for. It doesn't matter what you think about anything else. Seeing mobs trying to influence this trial should shock and horrify you at least as much as the George Floyd video did. This is a picture of a country moving backward at high speed. But the strange thing is that most people didn't seem shocked or upset by any of this. They seemed relieved by the verdict. They'd, of course, seen the boarded up buildings. They'd watched the troops in the streets, and they understood very well what an acquittal would mean. They believed that a conviction, whether it was justified or not, would buy the country peace. Many people thought this, not just cynical people, most people, including many Republicans. Some of them said so. If we obeyed Maxine Waters and ignored the pig blood, hopefully the chaos would end. And you can see why they felt that way. After 11 months of violence and intimidation from BLM, mostly unrestrained, Americans just decided to pay the ransom. They understood Derrick Chauvin as a sacrifice for the sins of a nation. And on television, They told us this was the case. They said it in the clearest terms. America is on trial, they told us. It's not just Derrick Chauvin, one cop from Minneapolis on the stand. No, it's all of us on the stand. Our history, our culture, our system. And we internalized that, and we went along with it. But we were foolish to go along with it. A wise country stands on its principles. It puts down mobs. It does not obey mobs. Mobs are never sated. It doesn't matter what demands you follow, they demand more. And now they are demanding more, not surprisingly.
When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers.
We're very focused, guys. We're very focused on punishing these white supremacists. And if they understand if one white supremacist get punished, that means that's going to open the door for more of them to get punished. So he, as a white supremacist, he don't want that. He understands his place in the system of white supremacy.